Hello, Ashley.
Hi.
Hi.
You have been working with the Sri Lankan Tamils in Australia, and especially the people who are seeking for asylum. And it's a very long journey. People they take a big risk reaching Australia. In sometime past, even Australian government had a big campaign in Facebook and say no to Australia and things like that. How this journey happens? How people take big risk in terms of reaching the shores of Australia?
Well, I think people take a risk just because they need to. They don't make a decision easily. It must be a very difficult decision for people. I think you only get in the boat when the water is safer than the land. And then often it can take a whole month to get to Australia. It's quite far. And a lot of people arrive first at Christmas Island, which is an island to the north of Australia. And that boat journey can be terrifying, and people can drown and you can starve because there's not enough food on the boats. So actually most people seeking asylum are incredibly brave.
They have nothing to lose.
They have nothing to lose, that's right. And then once they arrive in Australia, that's only really the beginning of the process.
Where do the journey start? Does it start in Sri Lanka? Does it start in Malaysia? Or does it start in Tamil Nadu? Where exactly?
Well, for Sri Lankan Tamils, it's always originating in Sri Lanka, obviously, because that's where the conflict happened and that's what created so many refugees in the first place. Many years of oppression of Tamil people and restrictions, and obviously there was many years of war. I think, from an outsider's perspective, there's often a cycle. It seems like, they have a bit of peace and there's some peace talks and negotiations, and then all of a sudden there's another outbreak of violence. And from someone who's looking at it from the outside, it looks like Sri Lanka will never really have a really strong peace until they acknowledge what's happened in the past and do some serious truth and reconciliation between the different ethnicities that live on that island. Obviously, so it starts there. People, they can't go back because they fear for their lives. The government's targeting certain groups, certain people, if you have a profile, if you're a member of a militant group. And then a lot of people leave and they might go to India or they might go to Malaysia or Thailand. There's a number of Tamils living in Bangkok, Thailand. But also people come directly to Australia as well from Sri Lanka.
How many days it would take for a boat to reach Sri Lanka if they start from Sri Lanka? How many days it would take to reach Australia?
Well, every boat is different because it depends on the quality of the engine and the ability of the people on board to navigate and things like that. But I've heard of it lasting more than a month on the boat. Yeah.
How do they survive for food and
That's right.
water?
I know of people who have only survived through the generosity of Indonesian fishermen. I know a lot of Tamils in Australia have a lot of gratitude and love towards Indonesian fishermen who will just be out in the ocean fishing and they'll see them and they'll just throw food and water on board without even asking any questions. They can't speak the same language. They just throw some bags of rice and throw some bottles of water and keep going on their way, and then people are so grateful for that.
How does the Australian government treat these people who take asylum in Australia? Do they Australian government, they were running a big campaign, say no to Australia. That's why I'm asking this.
They treat them very poorly in Australia because our two major political parties have been able to twist the story and tell lies about people seeking asylum, and basically...
How exactly?
So a long time ago, about I think in 2001, I might be mistaken of the year, but there was one day that one of the boats nearing Christmas Island, I think it was, there was people it was sinking, the boat was sinking, and what the politicians did is they said, people are throwing their babies off the boat in order to get to Australia. As like a trick, they're just doing it on purpose. And what kind of people would do that? This is horrible. It was not true, obviously, that no one would do that. It was called the Children Overboard scandal, and it was just before an election, and the Liberal Party of Australia used those lies to build fear of people seeking asylum. So there's very deep fear of people seeking asylum in Australia because of that issue, but also because Australia has a really complicated past. As you know, we're a nation of migrants. there was an indigenous group of people that lived in Australia, and then white people came and migrated and colonised Australia very violently. And so I remember once I was in Burma and someone said to me, people who have taken something from someone else are always scared that it's going to be taken from them. So as white people in Australia, we took the land from our indigenous brothers and sisters, and so white people, I think, are very scared of something like that.
There is a conflict between people taking asylum in Australia and the state, the government.
Yes.
What is your role? How do you work?
Myself, as well as a number of other people, we work really hard to try and prepare the refugee claims, so the asylum seeker claims, to prove that people are refugees, so to help people. So it's a long process in Australia. You can't just turn up and say, hi, there was a war, I had to come here. You have to go through interviews and write down your statement and research what was happening in Sri Lanka and provide documentary kind of evidence. You need expensive lawyers.
People will come without proper documents. They may not, when they want to save their life,
yes,
they
run away without their documents.
Huge documents.
And a lot of people, their documents, people's houses were burned down and bombed and things like that. So no one has, generally I think there are, that there's less and less of that, because generally people will be able to call a family member and say, hey, can you send me my birth certificate and things like that. Okay. And so people are generally able to get their hands. There are some people that have absolutely no documents, and they do have a bit of a hard time proving who they are. I know that there's a man in detention in Australia who's been in detention for 9 years because he doesn't know who he is. He doesn't know where he was born. And the Australian government uses that as an excuse to keep him locked up, like a criminal, even though he hasn't actually committed any crimes. So often people think of Australia as a very fair and just country, and I would say it is for some people, but not for others.
It's for the white people, you mean to say? Okay.
For some of us, it's a great place to live, and for others, it's extremely unjust. So we put people in detention for extremely long periods of time. 9 years, I think, is the longest, but it's...
How is the life in detention camps?
Depressing. It's very depressing to be... I think the indefinite nature of it makes it worse. If you knew, okay, I have to spend 6 months here, I can deal with that, it's fine, I'll be out in 6 months. But instead, they'd never know when they're going to get out. So it could be tomorrow, but it could be 10 years from now. And people get very... that kind of is terrifying. And we don't even do that for criminals, because people that commit a crime get a sentence and they know. Yeah, sure. But people who are seeking asylum don't get that. And so some people are in detention for a day, and then others are literally just indefinitely detained. And the centres themselves, they have facilities. They're not terrible places in terms of people have a bed and there's food provided, although not that fantastic, because I know...
Detention camps also known for abuses, child abuses and things like that.
That does happen, yeah. There have been cases of that, and especially in our offshore detention. So we have 2 types of detention. One's onshore, so that's within Australia. Then we have offshore detention, which is in Papua New Guinea, so in Manus Island and Nauru. And so we have detention centres, camps in there. And I think that the facilities and the abuse and the treatment of people is far worse in those centres, because, of course, no one can see them.
How the government divides people, let them be in offshore? What is the criteria that makes them...
The date when you arrived. So there's been various iterations of detention camps offshore and onshore, and we're constantly changing our policy. But generally, I can't remember how many years ago, but several years ago, the politicians decided, okay, anyone coming after this date, we're sending you to Papua New Guinea, we're sending you to Manus Island or Nauru. Doesn't matter what your situation is, you're being sent there and you're not coming to Australia. And what's really sad about that is, we have one client, it's so tragic, he came on a different boat to his wife just because of their financial circumstances. And so he came here a few days before she did, and he's in Australia working and living his life, and his wife is on Nauru with their small child. And she has attempted suicide a number of times. And it's tragic because when she was so unwell, they flew her to Australia for medical care, because there's insufficient medical facilities in Papua New Guinea for our refugees. And so when she was flown to Australia, she was flown to Brisbane, and he was living in Melbourne, which is about 3 days' drive from Brisbane. And he didn't even know, no one even told him that his wife was flown to Australia.
People who go to any country seeking asylum, they're going to help they're going to build the economy better.
Absolutely.
Then why governments, they curtail their entry?
So instead of embracing global migration, which is a fact of life, every country there is going to be migration, and whether you make rules or no rules or laws or jails or no matter what, we are going to have movement of people. That's in our nature. We're all going to move because some of us want a better job, some of us want to get married, some of us are fleeing war and poverty and famine. So there is going to always be migration around the world, and governments are constantly trying to figure out how to navigate that. But what has happened in a number of, especially Western countries, is politicians have realised that it's easy to win votes if people are scared of other people coming from other countries. It's so easy. You say, look over there, there's these horrible people coming, they're going to take all of our land and take all of our medical bills, take all of our jobs, drain our resources, and we'll protect you from that. If you vote for us, we'll protect you from that. And unfortunately, it's been very successful policy, and people get scared of someone else. Oh, you look different from me, you speak a different language, you eat different food, and it's easy to win an election on that. There's a lot of minority parties around the world that are trying really hard to change that message, to remember that people are seeking asylum, they're just like us. Their kids go to our school, they're our neighbours, they're our friends and family. They want the same things we want. Mostly they want somewhere to live, stability, a job, some friends, and to enjoy their life. Pretty much. That's what most people want around the world, right? However, for some reason, fear is a really incredible tactic. Xenophobia. But I believe that hope is stronger than fear. So I hope...
But we get two kind of messages. One side like this, another side, Australia, you have agreed, they have recognized Tamil as a language. Now you can study in schools and colleges. We also get this kind of news that in a way it really makes me to think that Australian government supports Tamil. Is that true? Why? But you are giving a completely non-rosy picture.
Yes, well, I think the Australian government supports migrants who pay their way to get to Australia. It's very expensive to migrate to Australia. If you come as an international student, the fees are extremely high. So they can make a lot of money that way, and a lot of it goes to the government. And so there's, and then obviously tourists build our economy, things like that. So I think you're right in that we have two messages, and it depends if it's an election year or not.
Okay. Yeah. Election plays a major role everywhere in the world. How many families that you have been working with, at least?
Hundreds and hundreds. I would say could be 200 or 300 individuals and families that myself and the team of people that I'm connected to have been working with, and that includes helping them with government documents when they receive. A lot of people get sent these really important documents and they can't read them, they don't know what they say, or they're asking them to do a very specific task that's quite legal in nature, or find a lawyer but they don't know where to go. Okay. So we're able to help them out in that regard. Things like getting a medical card so you can go and see a doctor, extending your visa so you're not going to be arrested. Even things like, if you do get arrested by the police, going down to the police station and talking on behalf of you to help you understand and help the police understand what's going on. A lot of trips to the hospital. If someone's sick, we go and we make sure they're okay. We've done some fundraising for people who've actually passed away and they wanted to have their body sent back to Sri Lanka and things like that. We've done a lot of advocacy work, protests and rallies and things like that. But yeah, lots of individual families and there's a lot of single men as well, or not single, they have their family back in another country and they're in Australia, and we've done a lot of work.
How is the civil society respond to these asylum seekers?
I would say on the whole, mostly wonderful. Like there's so many amazing volunteers. Like we have a big movement, I think, of churches who go into the politicians' offices and protest in their office and say, you must bring everyone from Nauru into Australia. Like we're totally against that policy. And they've been getting arrested, like priests and nuns getting arrested. Other people, let them live with them or find out how to get their kids enrolled in schools. I know that there's one lady that we're very close with, and her community around her, all the local community paid for her son to go to join the basketball team, and all his school, all his uniform and everything like that. And so I would say civil society generally is very positive and embraces people. Unfortunately, there's also a segment of society that hasn't been so positive, but I would say that's a minority.
Now there is no war in Sri Lanka. Do people still come to taking asylum?
There is no war in Sri Lanka, but I would say it's still not yet at peace. That would be my stance, given that they still have the Prevention of Terrorism Act, which people can be arrested without any charge and held for indefinitely, and other types of things. Like I know one person who is worried the Australian government's trying to send him back to Sri Lanka, but the army has occupied his land. I mean, what's he supposed to do? And the other thing is, if you left Sri Lanka, it's illegal to leave by boat from Sri Lanka without officially going through the official channels. And so you have to go and check in with the local police station, and you can't get a passport, and you face harassment every day. And there is an extreme militarization of the north and east. So there's a lot of police, a lot of army in areas that really don't need it. It's almost like colonial sort of colonization up there. And things like last time I was there in Sri Lanka, there was one location near Trincomalee where there's a beautiful temple, and then literally right within like 2 meters they've built a giant Buddha right in front of it, enormous. Okay. Even though there is no Buddhist people that live in that area. So there is a subtle oppression of Tamil people, even though there is no war.
You mean subtle or very deliberate?
Well, yes, that's right. It's not shooting people on the street, perhaps, although we have had cases of that, and especially gender-based violence, because there's a lot of widows and a lot of single women because men died in the war. They face sexual harassment, and of course, you know, that's not something that they can talk about to the police.
Do you think that international society have ignored Sri Lankan Tamils?
Absolutely, I do think that. I remember when I was studying at university, my university was right in the city centre, and there was a lot of protests happening with the red and gold and about Sri Lanka, and I didn't even know, I had no idea what was going on. And it wasn't on the news, it wasn't published, nothing. Now, obviously, it's a little bit more well known because there's a lot of activists that have done so much work in raising the awareness. We had a wonderful journalist called Trevor Grant who took a deeply passionate passion for the Tamil people, and he was quite a well-known journalist, and he published countless articles about the Tamil struggle. He even published a book which told the stories of people seeking asylum, revealed, you know, how people were tortured and just the horrific tactics of the Sri Lankan army. And he's been to Chennai and visited the refugee camps and things like that. So people like that, they really contributed to the awareness that Australia now has of the Sri Lankan issue.
Have you learned Tamil?
Konjam.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you very much.